Roll for Crit is made possible thanks to the support of viewers like you and our patrons on our Patreon page.
You can become a patron for just $1 a month at patreon.com/rollforcrit. Welcome to Roll for Crit. You're joining us now as part of our special Gen Con online coverage, and we are privileged to be in the presence of Mr. Bistro from Plaid Hat Games, who is here to talk about their latest release, biggest release of the year, one that we're excited about, we've been playing, called Forgotten Waters, which is a Crossroads game themed around pirates. So, Mr. Bistro, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You are the co-designer and writer of this game. So if you could, for anyone who doesn't know, if you could walk us through what the game is like and what you specifically contributed to it as well.
Yeah, so Forgotten Waters is kind of like a cross between an RPG and a party game. It's about 3 to 7 players that we have a 1 to 2 player variant. And it's an adventure game. It's a narrative adventure game. You have a character on a pirate ship. Everyone's working together and you play through a bunch of different stories. They're not connected. It's not a campaign game. And it's basically just sort of a silly, let's see what kind of troubles we can get into sort of game. It's a narrative experience. So there's 5 different scenarios that come with the main box, and you can play through them together. There's a lot of variability based on what characters you're playing, what choices you make within the story. I am the fiction editor at Plaid Hat, and with this particular game, I wrote pretty much everything that's all the different story elements, which we recently totaled up. It's about 100,000 words, so about the size of a novel. Yeah, and so I'd be responsible for either taking a scenario that one of our other designers, Isaac or Joe, wrote and rewriting it, or making up a new one myself. So we had 3 guys total. There's Isaac Vega, who at the time was Plaid Hat's lead designer. And he took this idea from Joe. He built out a lot of the rules, redesigned a lot of different elements. He's also responsible for playing through all the scenarios and fine-tuning everything. Joe was who had the initial idea, was one of our designers, and he also built our app that goes along with the game, which is pretty critical for it. And then my big contribution was the writing. We did it independently. We worked independently, ran playtests independently, and then every now and then would pull together for a big summit and sort of hash stuff out.
Yeah, we were just talking about how you guys are used to working separately and then coming together. But what's that process usually like in terms of, being on the same page and worrying about what you need to change or what not to change, especially maybe in terms of the writing? Because for a game like this, I assume you have kind of a story path laid out that you're working within.
Yeah, so it really depends. Like a lot of our games are narrative games. Like Jerry Hawthorne, who made Mice and Mystics and Stuffed Fables, he does a lot of narrative games. So with Jerry, though, he usually writes out everything, and he has a very unique voice. So when I come in and work on a Jerry project and I rewrite his fiction, I'm going to rewrite it, but try and capture all of his specifics, try and capture his voice. So it's very much working and trying to mimic another person. But with this, there was a lot more freedom. There was too much writing, first of all. There was just no way that everyone could write it and then I rewrote everything. We just couldn't do that. So we each had our responsibilities. Joe is a designer, but at the time he was working for Asmodee as one of their IT guys. So he had a limited amount of time he could put into it at a certain point. So Isaac really took lead on a lot of the initial mechanisms that were developed, and he brought in new stuff, like the different characters you can play. There's 21 different characters that you can play in the initial game. And he actually came up with that idea of giving people specific characters, and each of these characters has specific story moments, 3 different endings just unique to that character, special items, all that stuff. And then I got the first scenario, which was pretty well written, but it was all over the place. Lots of different people had written in our giant spreadsheet that housed the story. And it was really just more about having a concrete, you go from point A to point B to point C and so on, making sure you hit all these marks in the story. So I went in and started adding, created the voice. So, how are we going to write this? What do pirates sound like? How does everyone talk? What do they look like? And just started building out the culture of the game. specific locales, started seeding references in the game. There's a lot of things we like to call back to. In fact, a lot of the scenarios will actually reference the others in very small ways that you might not pick up on, depending on what order you approach them in. So eventually, I would write out a scenario. They would play through it. They'd say, "Here's what worked for people. Here's what didn't." When you have to write like 100,000 little jokes, at some point, a bunch of them fall flat. Some of them just don't work. No one knows what you're talking about. So there's like lots and lots and lots of rewriting, and everyone's doing their part. So Isaac's tweaking rules over here. Joe is redoing rules. I would be rewriting stuff. It was, yeah, I'm not really sure how we did it. Actually, now that I think about it was kind of messy. It was definitely messy at first.
Speaking of jokes, I mean, this is technically part of the Crossroad game system, and the previous two with Dead of Winters and Gen 8.
Gen 7.
7, sorry. I don't know. I had 8 in my head. But both
You were
of them
one off.
Very darker themes. I
It
mean, there's
is.
still some dark elements in this, but this is definitely a bit more lighthearted, I would say.
Mhm.
Especially some of those events.
Yeah, well, we knew we went. Well, I pushed for more silly. It wasn't as silly beforehand, and I still tried to keep a lot of the heart that was there. Like some of the captains, we really want you to love them. Like the first guy, Jesbit Vance, we really wanted people to like Jesbit Vance. He's crazy. He's kind of a mess, but he's a nice guy. So we wanted to have heart. We wanted you to care about characters, but it had to be silly. And in real life, pirates are horrible people. They do horrible things to people. So we didn't really want to go there. So we wanted it to be cartoonish, high fantasy pirates. Yeah, so that was... Sorry, I completely forgot what your question was.
Just the idea of shifting tones from, as you said.
Oh, yeah.
serious to silly.
So Gen 7... Gen 7 was serious. That was the story that came to us from Steve Nicks, the designer. And so we had to maintain that. If you got too silly, you could lose what was going on there. Dead of Winter, we started off kind of silly. Like there's Sparky, the stunt dog, is in the very
Right.
set. So it wasn't too serious, but yeah, I mean, zombie apocalypse. So the whole point of that is to capture that oppressive feeling of everything's hopeless. But Dead of Winter still has a lot of jokes in it because there's hundreds of Crossroads cards in that game, and at some point you just run out of ideas. So there's probably like 10 different people who have contributed to those Crossroad cards. So, but yeah, still much darker. There's some dark stuff in Forgotten Waters, but it tends to be much lighter in tone.
Were you, I mean, any specific influences for Forgotten Waters, or just in general? I don't know. You're writing that it's kind of like a sense of humor that you think has been brought to your work from various sources over your life.
Favorite joke?
Yeah, I mean,
favorite joke from the game.
Oh man, I don't think I can share the favorite joke because just talking about it would be a bit of a spoiler. But yeah, I'm a comedy nerd. Like I love watching stand-up specials. I've, like most kids, I rewatched every Monty Python movie over and over again. So that's very much where my tastes lie. I like surreal humor a lot. I like to get weird. I really like weird comedy. That's my favorite. So without a doubt. So we try and bring that to Forgotten Waters, where you have some real what the hell just happened kind of moments. The initial inspiration, I would say, was, Joe came up with the idea, and for him it was Monkey Island, the old Monkey Island games.
Of course, yeah.
He absolutely adores those. I mean, who doesn't? For Isaac, when it came to lighthearted pirates, he didn't have as much of that background, but he liked, Pirates of the Caribbean, that kind of stuff. Yeah, for me, in terms of actual pirate inspiration, I don't know. Certainly, I like the Monkey Island games. I had a large collection of pirate Legos when I was younger. Perhaps that was it. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of Monkey Island, and you could definitely see that, read a lot of that inspiration in how this one works. I mean, partially just because there are only so many comedic pirate things.
It's true. There aren't that many.
So maybe it's a little too easy to draw that connection.
And then people might actually be angry if they're not in there. You got to make certain
Right.
pirate jokes. It's mandatory.
Yeah, well, that's the thing too. It's like you don't want to reference too much. You don't want it to be like parody, but yeah, at the same time, you do want to like have little nods to things, so that it's kind of a tough line to walk. Isaac mentioned Muppet Treasure Island as a big inspiration. It's like, yeah, that's totally works too.
Yeah, I love that. We've been talking a lot about the app that's involved in this game, and there's the app that you use to play it, and there's also a remote app that you
Yeah,
can use separately to play with people who aren't in the same room as you. Yeah, hopefully maybe you can talk a little bit about what went into the development of both of those, and how I mean I imagine it must have been difficult. I'm not a computer programmer. I don't know if you are, but like how much input did you have into how that exactly worked?
yeah. So initially, we weren't going to do an app. Then we costed what it would be to have booklets for all 5 scenarios, and it was way too expensive. It just would have driven the price of the game up way too much for what we think like the customer expectation would have been. So Joe started looking into it, and he hit upon the idea of doing a web app. So instead of a native app, which is going to go through different app stores, a web app is something where you just go to a website. It's right there. We can update it really easily, and it let us do a lot of stuff to sort of help overcome some people's worries about an app. I mean, we've played games to apps. We know what we have liked and what we haven't liked, and we had shared some of the same concerns that people have. So by doing a web app, it never becomes outdated. You know, if your phone updates, you can't suddenly not run the app. And you can also download it. You can download it from the website to a device. So if, you know, society collapses tomorrow and your first concern is playing Forgotten Waters, you still can if you've downloaded it to your laptop. So
Not an unlikely scenario right now for me.
I mean, we are in the midst of a pandemic, a global pandemic. So I don't know. Could be better, you know? So yeah, so that was the initial app. And it worked so much better than we really expected. And so we really liked it. In fact, we didn't initially have the idea for voice acting, but then Colby, who's the owner of Plaid Hat Games, hit on it. It was like, I think we should do it. It was very, I don't want to say last minute, but it definitely extended the amount of time we needed to develop the game a lot more. But we wanted to get professional voice acting. The game was written in a heavy pirate dialect, because if you don't write pirates like that, they don't sound right. They just they have to be saying R. They can't pronounce G's on the ends of words. You know, that's just the way it's got to be. But not everybody can easily read a dialect like that. Not everyone likes to read aloud, period. So when you start adding dialect, it just makes it more difficult. So having that voice acting just seemed like a sure way to make sure everybody was comfortable playing the game and it was easy. So we did that, and then the pandemic hit, and it totally shut down our plans to release the game, and we were pretty scared. But you know, when coronavirus started taking off and just sort of burning its way through the country, a lot of people were doing things to help other people out. Entertainers were trying to provide free content. Everyone was trying to do something. And our game seemed like perfect for large groups of people, and people couldn't gather in groups. So it's like, well, what do we do? And so Joe had this idea. It's like, well, what if we made a device that let people play together anyway? And just so we can maximize the number of people who are playing, we'll make it so only one person has to have a copy of the game. And I think we were all like, yeah, okay, Joe, not sure how that'll happen. But he's like, no, I'll try it. And then one day he was just like, okay, I did it. And we're like, what? And so he made this remote assistant. It's just on our website. And all you really need is one person to have like a camera that shows the board, so that people can see the board state, where the ship is, and see the surrounding islands and stuff. But everything else is right there on the app. Everyone can see their characters, they see what their roles are, everyone can do their little part. It's just like playing the game. It works really well. In fact, we use it now to develop for the game. So, because we can all play together online, it's super easy. So,
yeah, that's convenient. That's how we've been playing it, using that app, and it's been I think I told Will, and he said, "Oh, I just thought that was like part of the game." Like it didn't occur to you, right? That was.
I mean, it worked perfectly well. I mean, I'm like, yeah, this makes sense.
Yeah, well, and there's this thing, like there's this fear that when you make something, it makes sense to you, and then you put it out there, like, will will it work for them? Will they get it? I mean, that's board gaming in general, right? When you're trying to write out rules, you're like, do people get my idea? So, but it's worked really well, and we're getting a lot of we've got a lot of really nice messages from people saying they've been able to sit down and like have family time with people they don't live with anymore. So that's it's been nice.
So I imagine that it sounds like there are more scenarios, future expansions planned right now for Forgotten Waters.
Yeah, the initial 5 we've got, I mean, they're big scenarios for starters.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it depends how many people you got playing. Some of them can go pretty long. That's why the game is set up so that it has a natural save point. That each game is split into 2 acts, so you can play for the first act, and if it's been like an hour or two, you can say, "We'll pause here and come back next time," and the game will remind you what happened last time, and you can pick it back up. So there's a ton of content, but we knew we wanted to get some out as soon as we could to folks, just so they could see that we were intent on supporting the game and building stuff out for it. So, we do have more content. It's planned. We've got 2 different things that we're looking at. There's just basic new scenarios people will want more of. So that those will have at some point in the near future. Those will take a while. It takes a long time to balance the scenarios because there's a lot of random elements that are a part of those. You have to consider, when you make a world where everyone just wants to peer under every rock and set fire to everything just to see what happens, you've got to test out all those possibilities. And then, of course, there's the professional voice acting, which takes a while. So we've got those, but we also have something called generic entries, where the game will look at when you encounter something, the game will look at the entry you're at, and it will say, okay, have they done this before? And if they have, what's something else we could do? So it pulls another generic entry out of storage and it plays that for you instead. So you can return to the same thing and it can be different over time. And so if we add enough generic entries, then we can actually add a lot of content too. And some of that we might announce, some of it we might not. I will say we've made some changes to the app since it launched. It's one of the great things about a web app. Like we can fix errors. There's no submitting it to, Apple or something, waiting for them to approve it. And we can also just add things, play around with stuff, and no one will know until they discover it.
Yeah, I was curious about that because in our 2 first playthroughs of the first story, first one we lost, second one we won. I won't spoil too much, but we came across a named character, and that had it wasn't part of the main story. It's a little side quest. It was pretty funny. Gertie, I believe, was the name, if I'm recalling correctly.
Yeah.
And she came up again, but in just more like a passing phrase, like it wasn't the same event. So I was really curious how that was decided and how you mapped out those characters.
So the app, some things are pretty simple. So for instance, sometimes you'll interact with a world and it results in you writing something in your log, right? And so then future questions will ask you, is this written in your log? And that'll determine then how you encounter what comes afterwards. So there's a lot of that. The app doesn't track things in too complicated a way. We wanted to keep it really simple, and it is. So your campaign log will usually track how your interactions will affect the rest of the world. But generally what the app is tracking is, have you done this before? So if you have done something before, and it's got something else that's brand new that you haven't seen yet, it'll pull that instead. We do have a lot of reoccurring characters. There's a character, Scroggs, who is a main character in one of the storylines. He's in Spoils of the Damned, but you can also meet him in Beyond the Ocean's Edge in a more minor role. There's a lot of that where you can encounter people, and we tried to make the world feel like it's got a little weight to it. And there are a couple of cases where you actually, especially in the first scenario, where you're literally changing the world, making a difference there.
Is it harder or maybe in some ways less pressure to design a game that's scenario based the way this one is, as opposed to a game where you set up a bunch of rules and ideas, but any time that players play it, all number of things could happen, versus there's a beginning and a middle and an end of this story, and that generally speaking, players are going to go from one path to another. Is that more pressure that you have to make it a really great experience, or is it a little bit nice that you have kind of like a guideline for you?
It's definitely easier to have a path to follow. So we've worked on open world versions of the game where you can just go do whatever you want, where the narrative would be emergent, and that was way more complex. Not only was it really hard for us to program that in the app and to plan stuff out, like is there a story that can emerge here that's meaningful, but it was also tough for the players to give the players an experience that felt meaningful and not just like lost wandering. So it's easier if you're doing a computer game because it doesn't matter how complex it is in the background. You can just keep layering all that complexity in. In a board game, you got to be really careful. The app can handle a little bit, but you don't want to take it away so it's no longer a board game. But you can't have but so much overhead in a board game. So, yeah, having a story with 3 parts to it definitely makes it easier. There are complexities that arise. So, that giving it away, there's one scenario where the state of your captain is questionable throughout the entire scenario. So, because of that, if you are going to have generic entries that can be pulled up, what if they reference the captain? And what if the captain isn't available at that moment? So that leads to, I can't tell you how many, oh man, what a headache that was. So you have to be careful at the same time to make sure that your crafted story, which works great for that scenario, doesn't impact all the others in a way that's negative as well.
Well, I think you did a good job.
Thanks.
So I'll be the first to say it.
Enjoying it quite a bit.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Now,
no, definitely. Yeah, go ahead.
I am curious though, if you have any updates on some of the games you have listed on your Board Game Geek profile. Hot Dog City, Battle for the Chili Wieners, Cripes, Look at the Pipes, and apparently you're very excited for Pooping Joey.
Yeah, so that was, someone copied and pasted that from our website under the About section. It was a joke. So yeah, I think Colby asked me to write a bio, which is like a really awkward thing to do for anybody, like to write about yourself. So yeah, Poop and Joey though. So that actually has more history than you would think. So I was really interested in programming for a while, and my mom bought me some software. It's basically like a game engine, a pre-made game engine that I could play around with. She said, "Now you've got to make me a game right now." So I was like, "You got it." And I sat down for about half an hour, made something called Poop and Joey, which was a game where there was Joey with his pants down, and you hit one button, any button actually, and Joey defecated. And that's how I thanked my mother. I offered that to her, and she had that look in her face that I've seen many times before. It was something akin to like, just resigned resentment. And yeah, so I made that for her. So I made a joke to Colby that I'd make Poop and Joey, and he has said many times that he demands to see Poop and Joey at some point.
Well, I think we need the Crossroads version of that.
Yeah. I don't know. It might had to be a print and play. It seems like a very specialty game for very, very certain specific audience. So.
We may have experienced some variant of that in our Forgotten Waters playthrough in some ways.
There is some crude humor. Yeah, we definitely put a little bit of the crude stuff in. We aim for a sort of a PG-13 rating, which I think it more or less is. I think we've had people say they can play with their kids easily because, if you read it aloud instead of doing the narration, you can just edit stuff out. And most of the adult humor should fly above the heads of kids. We tried to make it that way. So. Yeah,
well, we have the minds of children, and it was fine for us.
Straight up poop jokes too. So.
Right.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, well, if anyone's watching and hasn't played the game, we definitely recommend it. It's very, very funny.
For like 2 hours. That's all it is.
Yeah. Whether you're into that kind of thing or not, I think you'll get a laugh out of it. And there's some really very cool story mechanics and things. We hope to have our full review of it up soon, if not already by the time you're watching this. So congratulations on getting the game out, and thanks so much for talking to us about it. And congrats on designing it. And we're looking forward to seeing what comes next from Plaid Hat, especially and now that, like you said, you're on your own again as your own studio. It's uncharted waters in some sense.
Yeah,
to see what's coming out.
Yeah, where I think you'll see a lot fewer releases from us as we spend more time on the stuff that we want to work on. And yeah, I mean, Forgotten Waters took 3 years. It's the most we've ever spent developing a game, but I think we're all really satisfied with what we put out. So that's won't take 3 years for like more content for Forgotten Waters necessarily, but I think you're going to see us making some really thoughtful releases, and hopefully it'll be as well received as Forgotten Waters has been so far.
Well, we are looking forward to it. Let us know what you think about Forgotten Waters, or if you have any follow-up questions. Maybe you can answer those in the comment section if you have time. No promises, people. Don't ask too many questions. But thanks for watching, and thanks for joining us again. And this has been Roll for Crit.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks to all our members of our Patreon page for making this show possible. You can sign up for exclusive benefits or help us by liking and subscribing.
You can also take a quick survey to help us improve Roll for Crit, and in exchange, you'll receive access to a Patreon exclusive podcast episode. Stay up to date on all our Gen Con online coverage, including live gameplay at rollforcrit.com.